I would now like to introduce the next panel discussion and invite Steve Simchak, Vice President and Head of Washington Office of the Reinsurance Group of America, to moderate our next session with former U.S. negotiators from Canada and Mexico, who will join us on screen to discuss prospects for resolving services and digital barriers in the USMCA. Steve, let me turn it over to you.
Well, thanks so much, Christy. And I want to say thanks as well to the whole CSI team. There's a handful of people in the room who may actually recall that 100 years ago, I used to manage the Global Services Summit. And I think that you all are doing a terrific job. It's great to be here without having to do all the immense administrative work that happens behind the scenes. And you all have done such a terrific job in keeping the summit going. And that certainly includes this year. So thank you. We've got an exciting panel, I think, very topical. We've heard a little bit already about the anticipated review of USMCA that will occur next year. We want to do a little bit of a deeper dive into that review of USMCA. So this panel is, as Christy said, is addressing services and digital barriers in the USMCA review, or as I like to think of it, can we get another bite at the apple? So this review, I think, offers an opportunity to assess not only what's been working in USMCA, but also to reflect on areas of potential opportunity, especially regarding services, cross-border data flows, and digital trade. From the U.S. perspective, I think I can speak for many in the room by saying that there's broad recognition that the services and the digital chapters of USMCA were groundbreaking. They set global standards on prohibiting data localization, protecting source code, and enabling cross-border data flows. They also included new commitments, new data commitments for financial services, which is particularly important to my sector and many others in the room. But these provisions are now facing new tests that have arisen since USMCA was completed. And I think we have to recognize that the regulatory and the digital landscape has shifted significantly since 2020. And that includes things like changes to domestic regulations, global trends in digital sovereignty, taxation, and privacy. And I think that presents a significant opportunity for us to examine how the agreement is functioning in these rapidly evolving areas. The political landscape, I have to acknowledge as well, has also changed. And I think I'd be remiss to point out how the Trump administration's tariff policies have impacted relations and the dynamics between the three trading partners. So we're going to unpack all of that, and we're going to try to do it in just 25 minutes. I'm thrilled to be joined today by Steve Verheul, Canada's former chief USMCA negotiator, and Guillermo Malpica, the former Mexican negotiator, to explore how USMCA partners are approaching this review next year. And their bios, of course, are in the package. I would note that many of us in this room worked with both of our guest speakers here today, so no need to go too deep into the bios, but really a distinguished duo here, and looking forward to talking with you both. So why don't I, Steve and Guillermo, why don't I just open it up with some broad scene-setting questions? And question for both of you. In your estimation, how are the governments of Canada and Mexico approaching this moment in North American trade as we approach the review, particularly in the context of services and digital trade? Steve or Guillermo, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Who do you want to go first?
Steve, why don't you lead off?
All right, thanks. Well, I think I have to kind of start by following up on what you just mentioned, which is the imposition of tariffs against Canada, in particular the product-specific tariffs, has clearly had a significantly negative impact on Canada-U.S. trade relations across the board. And that obviously can't just be contained to goods. It also extends to services and other areas. And I think we've also seen a lot of concerns raised about the reliability of the U.S. as a trading partner and as an ally going forward. So I obviously need to say that up front. And I think it's raised obvious questions about the value of the USMCA if we have so many breaches with respect to the obligations taking place at this point in fundamental ways. But having said all that, I think at the end of the day, Canada believes that it's in the economic interest of all three countries to return to an integrated North American economy. And I think that would allow us to effectively compete with the rest of the world It provides benefits to all three countries, and we remain committed to going down that path. On services specifically, I think we do have some issues that will need to be addressed in the review if we can manage to get it on a track where we're kind of returning to an integrated approach. I think that Canada will be expected to continue its defense of its cultural policies, and that has raised certain tensions in the area of audiovisual services. Tensions are likely to continue on issues like the Online Streaming Act in Canada, and there's a court case that's been brought by Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Spotify, and others on that issue. And I think on the whole issue of Canada's digital service tax, that will also be an issue that will be a subject that will come up in those kinds of discussions. But I think more broadly, on a lot of these issues, and in particular on digital trade, the atmosphere has changed considerably since USMCA was negotiated. And I think that rather than strengthening provisions around digital trade and advancing them, there's been more of a focus on security and protection. And I think the key question for the three countries in North America is, are we going to move in the direction of trying to better coordinate efforts with respect to how we deal with those issues? And try to move forward on that basis, or whether the U.S. is going to be more inclined to want to go its own way and not pursue further integration in the North American market. So again, our biggest issue is we would want to go that way. We see that there's a lot of good work we could do on the services and digital trade side. We're just not sure that our U.S. partner is there.
Thanks, Steve. And Guillermo?
Thank you, Steve. And I would like to start by thanking the Coalition of Services Industries for the invitation. With respect to your question, well, Mexico is preparing for an eventual review of the USMCA. Of course, internally, we have several legal procedures to follow. We have a law that is related to international agreements on matters relating to economics, to the economy. So we have to follow those rules of that specific law, which is not really burdensome for the government. It's basically a request of informing what Mexico intends to negotiate or to review before an international trade negotiation, for example, and then to inform periodically during the process of negotiation and at the end of the process, in order to prepare the Senate, which is the only chamber in Mexico's Congress that is in charge of approving these international agreements. Depending on the depth of the review, we will be deciding whether to pass it through the Senate or not. If it's only a review of commitments that are already explained in the text of the agreement, that I think that would not require to pass through the Senate, but depending on the context of the general review, we have that clarity at the moment of the review. In terms of the services and digital trade provisions, we are preparing internally. You know, we have, since the negotiation of NAFTA, and a structure for the review from the private sector, for the review of the negotiations that the government is engaging in with respect to international trade. We call it Cuarto de Junto, the room next door. And it's a very well-organized structure with representatives of the private sector for each one of the chapters that are being negotiated. So we are relaunched that structure a few months ago, and now I am no longer in the government, and I am in the private sector, and I'm very proud to be part of this process of assessing the negotiations from the private sector standpoint, coordinating precisely the chapters on trading services and digital trade, among other topics that I negotiated when I was a civil servant from the Mexican government. So preparing in that sense. I totally concur with Steve's comment that the question here is whether the three countries are going to have an approach of a regional approach to take advantage of this review or not. But what I see more and more is a common understanding among the private sector of the three countries that some issues might be pushed by the private sectors in some very specific cases. We have seen that approach, and I think that will be extremely useful, especially for the Mexican government, which is involved in a number of internal challenges and will require the support of the private sector with inputs and information in order to have the best negotiating position also in these very difficult times for North America.
Very interesting. Guillermo, could I just ask a quick follow-up question? You mentioned that depending on whether there are new commitments that come out of the review, it may require review by the Mexican Senate. Perhaps you could just share with us, is trade as politicized an issue domestically in Mexico now as it is in the United States? We see it becoming increasingly politicized here. Or would this be, depending on the commitments, more of a pro forma review by the Senate in Mexico?
Well, we have seen since the previous administration, 6 years ago, a change in the perspective with respect of trade and trade negotiations. We no longer see that from the standpoint of the government as a priority for the state decisions, and that was very difficult to face. But I think it's now a reality that is confirmed in the new administration. It's not a priority. Trade negotiations are no longer a priority, but they take very seriously their commitments under the agreements that they have in force. Having said that, they have been, of course, following up the new trade policy from the U.S. government, and their approach, as you know, has been very cautious in terms of what should be the Mexican response to the tariffs imposed to Mexico and other countries under different U.S. domestic laws. But in general terms, what I see from outside, from the Mexican government, is that they are intending to follow that cautious approach because they are trying to exploit the ability to negotiate, to discuss internally with the government officials from the U.S. government, trying to coordinate as much as possible with Canada on topics where we have common interests, and we may argue that is a correct approach or not, but so far we have seen that it has evolved in the possibility of having a dialogue with the U.S. government on certain topics. Of course, Mexico, I am sure, reserves the right to change that position if there are new news or new decisions from the U.S. government in different topics. But in terms of the services negotiations, I don't see that the public discussion has been very, very loud. I don't see that, and I won't expect to have a very contentious discussion under the review of the USMCA with respect to the services and digital trade chapters. We have very specific, very, very well located specific concerns, and we can discuss them in the following questions. But I don't see that trading services or digital trade is going to be one of the more contentious topics during the review process of the USMCA.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. And actually, that follows well into my next question here. You know, as I mentioned in the introduction to this panel, USMCA's digital trade rules really set a new standard in international trade law and policy on digital issues, I would say. But as I also mentioned, 5 years later, the situation has changed significantly, both economically and technologically and politically. So Guillermo, maybe I could just ask you, do you see the provisions that exist now in USMCA, are they still meeting the signatories' needs? It sounds like maybe you think that there could be some additional changes to reflect the new reality. Where might you see those opportunities to strengthen or clarify those commitments?
I see that the original provisions are still useful, especially talking about the core provisions of the digital trade chapter related to the free flow of data, the obligation of not forcing companies to locate in a specific country the servers and essential an essential parts of the process of those services. But I see that the international discussion is going in some other aspects of the digital economy that were not really considered in depth in the negotiation of the digital services chapter, such as the artificial intelligence challenges in different fronts. No, and I consider that not a topic specifically subscribed only to the services and digital services chapters, but mainly at a cross-border, a cross-sectoral topic that should be discussed in a different manner, not within the context of a specific chapter, but in a cross-sectoral manner. But I have seen also a lot of discussion in Mexico and internationally on different topics, such as the use and property of data, cybersecurity concerns, where we have an article, but it's basically a best endeavor clause. Perhaps there is a margin there for a discussion on how to make those provisions, which are already there, more legally binding, if that is the common interest, or if we should incorporate other topics, new topics related to the new reality of the digital economy worldwide. We have seen discussions last week and this week in the International Labor Organization, for instance, related to the future of work, for digital platforms. That is a very important discussion, and I think that also touches the digital environment in the USMCA. We could ask ourselves if we want to engage in a discussion there, and if we want to engage also in a discussion of whether we should be more coordinated as a region in those international fora, such as the ILO and other international organizations.
Thank you. And Steve, why don't I ask you the same question? Are there particular areas or opportunities where you see to strengthen or clarify the existing commitments in the review?
Well, I think there are some. I think that the provisions in the digital trade chapter on data localization, cross-border data flows, source code, algorithms, all of those were a significant step forward in USMCA. And we've seen some discussions happen after that as well internationally, like the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement that Chile, New Zealand, Singapore, and others tried to initiate. Canada was looking at joining that agreement at one point in time. But as we discussed earlier, I think the international environment has shifted somewhat. And there's less of a focus on strengthening rules around digital trade and more of a focus on these privacy and security concerns that we've been discussing. And we did see that particularly under the Biden administration, where questions were raised about whether the U.S. approach at that time provided benefits to small business, to innovation, to workers. All of that was a subject of discussion, as well as the U.S. starting to reconsider support for rules on cross-border data flows, on data localization, on source code, all of those issues in the WTO context. We saw the U.S. draw away from that, which I think sent a certain signal as well. So I do think that the provisions on market access in the USMCA digital trade chapter still represent a benchmark, but I think the focus going forward is going to be much more on these issues around primarily security, whether it's cybersecurity threats, whether it's malicious actors, data integrity, the AI issues, all of those things I think will need to be addressed in some form. And ideally, at least from a Canadian perspective, we would like to move towards more cooperation and coherence on how we address these concerns in a coordinated North American fashion. I think that would put us in a much stronger position vis-a-vis the rest of the world. And I think that there would be a lot of gains that we could all achieve by looking towards further integrating the North American market going forward in these areas so that we have common and coordinated approaches. But again, we get back to the questions about what does the U.S. really want in these areas, and is it intending to be a reliable partner or an ally? And those concerns didn't exist when we negotiated the digital trade chapter back in 2018 and 2019. They very much exist now. So, as my Mexican colleague suggested, I think that we do see a lot of support from the private sector for continuing in the direction of a North American market to compete with the world and aligning that market as much as possible. But the difficulty, of course, is that we're not getting that signal from the Trump administration at this point.
Thanks, Stephen. You know, you mentioned privacy and security, which obviously are top of mind in all of these digital trade discussions. And it seems to me that a lot of the newer efforts since USMCA that have come up internationally really have been focused on privacy and security. I'm thinking of data free flow with trust and these kinds of programs. If privacy and security are the focus of the review, or become a major focus of the review, it sounds like, do you think we're moving towards having just greater exceptions, a larger carve out to these commitments than we had in USMCA?
Well, I think it's a question of how it's done. Our preference would be that we don't move towards those exceptions or reservations within USMCA. Instead, we try to take a coordinated approach in relation to our interactions with the rest of the world. Many of the security concerns relate to practices by China, practices by other malicious actors outside of North America. We would rather see an approach taken that we try to align ourselves in a kind of common approach to ensure that the North American market is protected, because I don't think the U.S. wants either Canada or Mexico to become a backdoor security threat to the U.S. So strengthen the North American market and continue to go down the path of strengthening digital trade provisions within North America, but coordinate on our approaches on how we address these issues that are confronting us all coming from outside North America.
Very interesting. So, and we're running out of time here. There's so much more we could say, but so Steve, you're seeing more coordination within North America, which would then allow North America to look out and deal with these kinds of issues. And you mentioned the talks between Chile, New Zealand, and Singapore and others. So Guillermo, real quick, let me just ask you very briefly: do you see the review between the U.S., Mexico, and Canada as strengthening the North American position relative to other markets?
I think that should be one of the objectives for that review. We see that from the private sector, and we are always conveying that message to the Mexican government that coordination is important in North America, and we will also try to reinforce that message through other actions. We just had in the North American Forum a very interesting discussion on regulatory coherence, for instance. So there are many instances in digital trade and services in general where we can start exploring ways to coordinate better in order to have regulation that is more coherent among North American partners.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both so much. Really appreciate this discussion, and looking forward to circling back after the review to see what happened. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
So I want to give a big thanks to Steve Simchak, Stephen Verheul, and Guillermo Malpica for that very worthwhile discussion and giving their perspectives from Canada and Mexico on the prospects for issues being dealt with in the USMCA review. We're also getting not only in the midst of negotiations with Canada and Mexico, but also getting closer to the start of the USMCA process. So very timely.